A major blow in the 18-year-long Madeleine McCann cold case, with the prime suspect
You are about to dive into the heart of one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries. David Payne, a close friend of the McCann family, carries secrets that continue to haunt investigators and leave the public full of unanswered questions. Do you want to be part of this investigation and be the first to discover the next clues? Sign up now and activate the notification bell to ensure that no revelation goes unnoticed. The night in Praia da Luz was unsettlingly silent. It was the kind of calm that seemed to hide something. The wind blew gently, carrying the distant sound of waves crashing on the beach. Among them, Kate and Jerry McCann were a bit distracted. Kate cast quick glances toward the apartment where their children were sleeping, while Jerry, on the other hand, was focused on the conversations and laughter echoing around the table in a nearby restaurant. Everyone was relaxed, enjoying the long-awaited vacation. David Payne, always a constant presence on vacations, was especially talkative that night. But there was something about his demeanor, something that made Kate feel an unease she couldn't explain. He was a doctor like many others in the group and always appeared willing to help, but there was something in his behavior that made Kate uncomfortable. Although she had never verbalized it, Fiona, David's wife, also seemed quiet that night. Maybe she was just tired from the trip, but there was a subtle tension in the air. It was when Kate decided to take a quick look at the children that everything changed. The apartment was dark when Kate arrived. The glass door to the balcony was ajar, and a chill ran down her spine. Kate's heart began to pound. Something was terribly wrong. Entering the room where Madeleine was sleeping, her world collapsed. Her daughter's bed was empty, and an instant chill ran down her spine. Little Madeleine, only 3 years old, had disappeared. Kate ran back, her eyes wide with terror, and screamed with a trembling voice, "They took her." Her words cut through the silence of the night like a cry of desperation that no one knew how to respond to. Jerry immediately stood up, confused and incredulous. David Payne was the first to react, trying to organize a desperate search. A climate of despair took over the group. What had happened? How could Madeleine have disappeared without anyone noticing? As the night progressed, the atmosphere became increasingly charged with fear and uncertainty. The police were called, and the searches began. The narrow streets of Praia da Luz were now filled with lanterns and worried voices as the group split up to search for the girl. But the more time passed, the stranger the situation became. Madeleine's disappearance was beginning to turn into a mystery that no one could comprehend. David, normally so calm and controlled, seemed restless. He promptly offered to search the area around the pool, but there was a tension in his gestures, something that would only be noticed much later. No one found it out at the time, but something was not right. His words were measured, and his presence, as supportive as it seemed, brought a shadow that would only be understood later. It wasn't until the next day that everything began to take on more frightening proportions. Tension increased when sniffer dogs entered the apartment. They ran straight to the sofa, where something unexpected happened. The unmistakable smell of death filled the air. The police began to investigate, and questions arose. Could Madeleine have been harmed there, in the very apartment where her family believed she was safe? Kate and Jerry were devastated, but the fear in their eyes suggested more than simple concern over their daughter's disappearance. Jerry, in particular, seemed to struggle to maintain composure. But what stood out most was David Payne's reaction. He watched everything from afar, avoiding direct involvement as much as possible. It was then that past details began to surface. Katharina Gasper, one of the couple's friends, had told the police about a disturbing incident involving David during a previous trip. She had witnessed strange and inappropriate gestures from him, something that made her never want to leave her daughter near him again. At that time, no one paid much attention, but now, with Madeleine missing and David's behavior increasingly suspicious, those memories began to gain new weight. As the investigation progressed, the police began to notice gaps in the testimonies. What really happened that night, and why did David Payne turn off his cell phone precisely in the days leading up to the disappearance? His silence was increasingly suspicious, and the other members of the group, including Jerry, seemed to be covering something. With each new clue, the tension increased. Something sinister had happened, something much bigger than Madeleine's disappearance. Quickly, it turned into a whirlwind of theories. What began as a desperate search for a missing child soon took a much darker turn. The Portuguese investigators, initially focused on the kidnapping hypothesis, began to question the inconsistencies in the testimonies of the parents and friends who were with them that night. Every detail that didn't fit seemed to increase distrust. The main conflict began to unfold when sniffer dogs detected the odor of blood and a body in the McCann apartment, and worse, inside the car the couple rented days after the disappearance. How could this be explained? Kate and Jerry, always steadfast in their narrative, began to show signs of strain. The interviews became more tense, with Jerry often taking the lead while Kate seemed increasingly withdrawn. The pain of losing their daughter was visible, but something in their posture raised more questions than answers. David Payne, on the other hand, always appeared willing to cooperate with the investigations. His responses, however, were measured and controlled, as if he knew more than he was willing to reveal. When confronted about his actions on the night of the disappearance, he was evasive. He described his movements precisely, but his eyes seemed to tell another story. It was at this point that Katharina Gaspar's testimony began to carry more weight. Her disturbing recollection of David's inappropriate behavior years before unanswered
now
questions
seemed to
only
take
fueled
on
more
more
speculation, and the pressure
The
on
investigation
everyone progressed
increased.
slowly, with each new
The
detail
breaking point
raising
came
more
when the
suspicions.
police
made a shocking discovery.
How could
Traces
David's
of
silence
Madeline's
in the
DNA
days
were
leading
found
up to
in the car
Madeline's
rented by the
disappearance be
McCanns
explained?
days after her disappearance.
His cell phone had been
This
deactivated
revelation
for
shocked
more
the
than
world
24
and
hours
changed the
during
course
a
of the
crucial
investigation.
Why
How
did
was
he
it
appear
possible
so
for her
calm,
DNA
almost
to be
cold,
there if the
when
car
everyone
was rented
around him
weeks
was
after the
emotionally
disappearance?
collapsing?
The obstacles were
The
many.
only logical explanation,
The English
according
press,
to the police,
initially
was that
supportive of the
Madeleine's body
McCanns,
had been
began to
transported
pressure
in
for
that
answers.
vehicle.
This
The
revelation
Portuguese
deeply
deeply
shook
shook
public
in
opinion
turn,
and
faced
placed Jerry
political
and Kate
limitations.
under an even stronger
The
spotlight.
case began to take on
The British
international
press,
proportions,
which had
and
previously
the focus
supported
shifted
them
to the fact that
unconditionally,
the British
began
government
to ask
seemed
more
more
interested in
questions.
protecting the McCann family's
Doubt hung in
reputation
the
than
air.
in discovering what
Could
really
the
happened
parents
that
themselves
night.
be involved in the disappearance?
Tension began to reach unbearable
Jerry
levels when
continued to
Kate
position
refused to
himself
answer
defensively,
48 questions
arguing that
posed
it was
by the
all a
Portuguese
police
mistake,
mistake,
a
simple
desperate
questions
attempt
to
that,
find
if she were
culprits.
completely innocent, there
But
would be
with every
no
word,
reason to
every
avoid.
new interview,
It became
why
harder
didn't she
to
want to
ignore the growing
cooperate?
discomfort in his voice.
What was she trying to hide?
Kate, who had been trying to stay strong until then, began to emotionally collapse. In a televised interview, she simply couldn't hold back her tears, shaking her head in denial while Jerry tried to maintain control. The weight of the suspicions on the couple seemed to be slowly destroying them, but the truth was still far from being revealed. Meanwhile, David Payne continued to be a silent shadow in the story. Questions about what really happened that night loomed over him like a storm cloud. Did he know more than he was willing to tell? The connections between him, Jerry, and the other friends in the group seemed to hide something much deeper than just a common friendship. The investigation entered a decisive phase with Madeleine's DNA found in the car rented by the McCanns. Everything seemed to be heading towards a dramatic conclusion. The atmosphere around the family was heavy, as if a dense cloud hovered over them, pressing down more and more. The Portuguese police advanced with their theories, and the international media waited impatiently for a conclusion. Jerry, usually articulate, seemed more nervous than ever in interviews. His eyes darted quickly, as if looking for an escape. Next to him, Kate could barely keep her composure. Her face, always tense, now showed genuine distress, her hands clenched together while Jerry. Pressures surrounding them. He tried once again to convince the public that they were being wronged, but something in the air had already changed. People began to question the narrative. The question no one wanted to ask was on everyone's minds: how did Madeleine's DNA end up in the car if she had disappeared weeks before the vehicle was rented? The silence that followed this question was heavy. It was as if the answer was somewhere, but everyone was too afraid to find it. In the McCann living room, the lights were dim, and the environment suffocating. What once seemed like a cozy home was now a prison of lies and uncertainties. Kate sank into the sofa, exhausted. Each new day seemed to be a greater struggle. David Payne, until then a discreet figure, began to be mentioned more frequently. Katharina Gaspar's testimony about his suspicious behavior years before resurfaced. She had observed strange gestures and subtle provocations, and now all of this seemed to fit together in a frightening way. Did he know more than he let on? Was he involved in some way? Payne maintained the same calm tone in his few public statements, but something in his posture didn't seem right. The group of friends, once united, was now under overwhelming pressure. They could barely look at each other without the weight of what had happened that night coming back to mind. Tensions increased, and small details from each person's statements began to show glaring inconsistencies. Every new interview seemed to raise more questions than answers, and doubt spread. The prolonged silence among them, Payne's evasive gaze, and Kate's inability to answer crucial questions turned the case into a tangled web of secrets that no one wanted to unravel. One of the most striking moments occurred when Kate, during a TV interview, was directly confronted about what happened that night. The question was simple but devastating: why didn't you call the police immediately when you noticed Madeleine had disappeared? Her silence lasted an eternity. The camera focused on her eyes, which wavered for a second before she responded with a choked voice, "I don't know." I was in shock. But something about that answer wasn't convincing. The public, once sympathetic to her suffering, now began to doubt. Desperation intensified with each revelation as the pieces of this dark puzzle began to form an image that no one was ready to see. What was being hidden that fateful night? Then came the last straw. David Payne, who had so far stayed away from the spotlight, was called for a new interview. They asked about his connections with the McCann family and about the days following the disappearance. His usual calm tone was the same, but there was a tension on his face that hadn't been there before. He hesitated when asked why his cell phone had been inactive on May 3rd, the night of the disappearance. The answer was vague, almost rehearsed, and left more doubts than certainties. The siege was closing in. Each new clue brought more questions. What were they hiding? What really happened that night? The public, who had followed each new episode, wanted answers. The pressure on the McCanns was at its peak. Every new piece of evidence emerged like a hammer, breaking the trust the public had in them. The media surrounded them from all sides, and the police continued their work, though for many, it seemed they were going in circles. The DNA in the car was a key piece, but to many's surprise, the McCann's explanation for it was disconcerting. Kate and Jerry claimed that Madeleine could have come into contact with the clothes or objects they had transported in the car weeks after the disappearance. A weak justification for such a contentious fact. Time passed, and the sense of urgency diminished. David Payne was put under the spotlight in an unexpected way. Katharina Gasper's testimony, which had long been ignored, finally received the attention it deserved. She described Payne in a disturbing manner. His attitudes and gestures, especially with the children, had always been uncomfortable. His soft speech and respectable doctor's appearance concealed a dark layer. An avalanche of criticisms public was confronted with these descriptions, but even Jerry seemed more worn down. However, his calculated speeches no longer had the same effect as before. Even with all the new suspicions David
raised,
Payne, who
there
had
was
so
no
far
concrete
remained
enough
in the
evidence to
background,
lead to an
also
arrest.
began to fall silent.
Frustration took hold.
His appearances became rare.
How can a
and he
child
seemed
disappear without
increasingly
leaving
isolated?
traces?
And more disturbing,
Katharina
how
Gasper
can so
and her
many
persistent
people keep
denunciations
secrets for so
continue
long?
to echo in the public's mind?
Each of the McCanns'
but without
close friends
definitive
who were
proof,
together that
Payne
fateful
managed
night
to
to
escape
maintain their
justice's
version of
grasp.
events so synchronously that
For
it
many,
seemed
the
rehearsed.
resolution never came.
Amidst all this,
The
case
case
was
already
largely
emotionally
archived by the
drained,
Portuguese
began to
police,
withdraw
without
even
concrete
more from
answers
public
as to
life.
where Madeleine was or what really happened
who used
that
to
night.
speak frequently,
was
time,
now a
which
shadow
was
of
once the
sadness and
McCanns'
exhaustion,
greatest enemy,
like someone
began
who had
to
been
become
broken
their ally,
inside.
slowly erasing
Jerry,
doubts and
on the
daily
other
headlines.
hand, remained steadfast,
But for
trying
those
to
who
protect the
closely
family
followed
from
the
the
case,
mounting pressure
the feeling that
surrounding
something
them.
much bigger was being covered up remained.
What really happened that night? Was it an accident covered up by desperation, or something much darker involving secrets that would never be revealed? The story of Madeleine McCann, a child full of life and dreams, was marked by mystery and pain. The search for answers led to more questions, and as it seems, Madeleine's fate will remain one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of our time. Kate and Jerry continued their lives, but the weight of losing a child never disappears for them. The pain is constant, an open wound that will never heal. David Payne, on the other hand, lives under the shadow of suspicions. Even without being formally accused, he carries the weight of suspicious glances and Katharina's allegations that always hover over him. His life, like that of the others involved, will never be the same. In the end, what remains is a destroyed family and a missing child. The truth, whatever it may be, remains hidden in the lines of testimonies, the flaws in the investigation, and the hearts of those who will never stop seeking answers. Mystery hunters, our investigation is far from over. What really happened that night? The answers seem to be getting further away, but one thing is certain, the mystery continues. So many details, so many versions, so many secrets still leave us with more questions than answers. To this day, no one knows for sure what happened that night, but one thing is clear, the mystery remains. Now, one thing is certain, not every monster hides in the shadows, some walk beside us, hidden in plain sight. This is the most terrifying truth of all. If you've watched this far, leave in the comments, I am a mystery hunter. I want to know who is with us until the end of this journey for answers. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now and help uncover the darkest secrets of the human mind. Here, every detail matters, and with each video, we take another step toward the truth. Mystery hunters, what other hidden secrets of the human mind intrigue you? Leave your suggestions for our next investigations in the comments, and who knows? You might help us unravel our next mystery. If you're looking for more answers and twists, click on the next video. In it, we will dive even deeper into a story that will challenge everything you think you know. Get ready for an even more disturbing mystery. Stay tuned, because evil might be closer than you think. Until the next investigation.